Thank you, Bhairavi, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As always, I'll begin with apologies because wherever I am invited as the great-grandson of the Mahatma, I know that initially I disappoint my audience because they don't find even a single characteristic in my visual appearance with Bapu. Unfortunately, that's how God has made me. I can't help it. So you will have to accept that. I was fascinated when I was asked to speak in this forum because I have done this before about 4 or 5 years ago at one of the previous ones where I was a part of a panel. But why it fascinates me is that even in his time, Bapu interacted a lot. Although he was the messiah of the poor, he interacted a lot with the captains of industry of his time because he realized that they had a big role to play in making the dream that he had seen for India into a reality. And so I think that responsibility continues, and we must send that message out. I'm going to digress a bit from the subject given to me to talk about because I think there are much more important things for us to listen to today than the history of the man. The history of the man has been written in his own words in voluminous works, and it just takes a little bit of time to go and look at it from various aspects of his life and his ambitions. What is remarkable about the South African journey is the way Nelson Mandela, as the President of India, on his first official visit, reacted to Bapu. And we must understand that Nelson Mandela was not a votary of nonviolence initially. He, as a matter of fact, believed that there would be, if South Africa was to achieve justice and freedom, it would be through the barrel of a gun and through terrorist activities. And initially, when my grandfather, Vanilal Gandhi, the second son of Bapu, was in South Africa, continuing the work of my great-grandfather, when he went to speak in the ANC meetings and speak about nonviolent passive resistance and things, Nelson Mandela and his group of young Turks would come and disrupt his meetings and heckle him and drive him away from the podium saying, you keep your nonviolence to yourself, we don't need it over here, get out of South Africa, we don't need you anymore. From that point of view to becoming the icon of nonviolence, reconciliation, and peace was a tremendous journey that Nelson Mandela himself undertook. And Nelson Mandela has written in his memoirs that while in solitary confinement on Robben Island, he was never alone because Gandhi was in his cell. That is when he discovered Bapu, and he discovered that nonviolence and reconciliation was going to be the way forward if he wanted to create a nation that would not destruct itself in its lust for revenge, but rebuild itself over the coming to terms with the injustices of the past. And Nelson Mandela, as the President of South Africa, when he came on his first official visit to India, his first engagement was going to Rajghat and paying tributes to his inspiration over there. And being a person with a highly developed sense of humor, when he left Rajghat, he wrote in the visitor's book, he said, India sent us a barrister, South Africa returned a saint. And this was the truth of the fact that a barrister went to South Africa and through his experiences and time in South Africa turned into somebody who was much different from that barrister image. And he had gone to South Africa not as a result of some blazing triumph, but because he was a complete and utter failure as a barrister, with the ignominy of being referred to as the barrister without briefs, and that did not refer to his underclothing. when he started practicing as a lawyer in the Esplanade Court in Mumbai, his first brief was that of a Muslim widow. And there was a buzz in the court because a Vilayat-trained barrister was coming and opening his innings in the Presidency Magistrates Court in Mumbai. And so all the lawyers wanted to see how this England-returned barrister was going to perform. So that day, the courtroom was jam-packed. And amongst them was Sardar Patel, who was also a practicing lawyer and who had some matter in Mumbai, so he was visiting, and he heard that a young barrister from England is going to open his innings today. So he said, let's go and see him. And in his autobiography, Bapu describes that event, saying that when his case was called out and he stood up to argue that case in front of the magistrate, he couldn't even utter the words, Your Honor. And he says, after attempting to do that for 10 or 15 minutes, when my tongue turned into a brick and my knees into jelly, the terror was so great that I dropped all my papers and all my brief and reference books, and I fled in panic from the courtroom. How would anybody ever trust their cases to him? And so he had to wind up and go to Rajkot and actually become a drafting clerk, because he realized that he could draft appeals and things much better than he could represent cases in the court. Such an abject failure got this opportunity to go to South Africa to represent two Indian merchants in their dispute, because the white African lawyers could not understand the accounting practices of the Gujaratis. And so this Gujarati barrister was called to come and help them. And fortunately, he got thrown out of the train. And that was like a catharsis. But then, of course, it's history, and we know what he did in those years after that. I don't want to spend more time in doing that, because I'm speaking to young Indians, and young Indians who are leaders of today and tomorrow. You know, we always like to tell the young that it's for tomorrow that you have to work. And then there's nobody left to work for today. The youth, if they have to be effective, have to work today and lead today and not wait for tomorrow, because that's where everything goes wrong. And so I would like to digress from the South African part, and while talking to Bhairavi, she said, you know, we would really like to listen to some of your personal anecdotes, the family anecdotes that happened, because the public figure, public persona is very well known to all of us. And so I'd like to narrate an incident that happened in Sevagram, his ashram in Wardha. Amongst, as I said in my opening remarks, amongst his close confidants were many industry captains, and this was one of those who was very close to him. And the young son of that family returned from abroad with qualifications from foreign universities. And as it happens, with great ambitions and a great will to do something. And he went to his father and he said that, you know, give me a couple of years to do what I would like to do, and then I will join the family business and run the business. And he said, you know, I've come equipped with education from abroad, and I really feel that I have within me the ability to solve the problems of our nation. And for at least 2 years, I'd love to do that. The father, who was very enamored of Bapu, felt that, you know, this was appreciable, and maybe Bapu would be the right tutor for his son. And so he took his son to Bapu in Wardha. And he told Bapu, he said, मेरे बेटे में राष्ट्र सेवा का जज्बा है. And I would like you to mentor him through this journey and, you know, guide him in what he should do, because he's very well equipped to solve the problems of the nation. Bapu told him, he said, okay, leave him with me, let him stay on the ashram, and I will guide his journey through this national service that he wants to do. And so the young man started living on Sevagram. On second day morning, Bapu told him, okay, you want to do service? So he says, yes, I am raring to go, I'm enthusiastic and I have the vision and I'd love to start working immediately. So Bapu said, okay, start cleaning the toilets. Now in those days, there were no flushable toilets. These were bucket latrines where buckets were used for toilets, and when they were 3/4 full, you had to pick them up and empty them in the cesspool and clean them and put them back again to use. A rather yucky thing to do. I'm not sure how many of us would do that in today's times. But because Bapu had told him so, the young man decided to follow his advice and he cleaned the toilets that one day. And the next day he went and said, I cleaned toilets yesterday. Can I do something else now? Bapu said, no, you just keep cleaning the toilets. The young foreign educated man cleaned toilets in the ashram for, thank you, for almost a month. At the end of the month, he went back to Bapu and he said that when I came to you, I had come with grand ideas because I had also come with an ego bloated by the sense of my own importance, that I was foreign educated and I knew all the solutions to the problems this country faced. But he said, I lacked one thing. I lacked the humility to be ready to do what was required, even the smallest thing that was required. And he says, in your own way, in this 1 month, you have taught me that it's important to have the humility to do the most demeaning thing but essential thing in this life and not wait to invent the rocket engine always. Unfortunately, even today, we all want to invent the rocket engine. We want to solve all the grand problems of our country. But we fail to have the humility of doing what is the least thing that we feel is necessary to do. Unless we have that humility, we can't really become leaders. The secret of Bapu's success was, he wasn't unique, he wasn't much different than what the leaders of that time were. But what made him, set him apart was his humility. His ability to do the smallest thing. The first thing that he did when he attended the Congress session in Calcutta was not deliver a big lecture from the podium. That whole session, he saw that they had made the campus filthy. They were absolutely filthy in their personal hygiene, and they had created a whole, cesspit over there. And what he did was picked up the broom and started cleaning up that mess quietly, not talking to anybody, not preaching to anybody, not even making it into a big thing that, look, I'm cleaning up this place. He just silently cleaned the mess that was being created over there. And this is what inspired people looking at him and saying, if he can do it, why can't we? This is the greatest way to inspire people and to get them to work. And this is what he cultivated within himself in South Africa. There were instances when Kasturba rebelled against him because she came from a very conservative background, and when he asked her to clean the chamber pots of the visitors in their house, she felt that it was a demeaning task that was not hers to be done. And from threatening her to throw her out of the house to making her realize that that was work that was important enough to be done and it wasn't demeaning, was the challenge that he faced with almost all his followers. And did he preach about it? No. He did it himself. He made the people realize that it could be done if you do it sincerely. And there was nothing demeaning about it. I don't know how many of us can be able to do that, but in India today, while we see such a lot of hopelessness, there are a few beacons of hope where people have not gone and invented the rocket engine, but done what was necessary, done what was required, done what made a difference in the life of the poorest of the poor and the weakest of the weak, and have succeeded. And that is what has kept our country from going over the brink. I remember a few years back, a class of economics students had come from the US, and their professor asked me this question. He said, in the textbooks of economics, we have a list of symptoms in societies which, if present, point to that society heading for revolution. And he said, we've been traveling through India and we've seen almost the entire list manifest itself in some way or the other in this country. But we don't see the ferment that would lead to a revolution. It's a very baffling thing, and many of us like to claim that it is our rooting in spirituality that keeps us away from chaos. But I don't believe that's true. I believe that there are, even if they are few and insignificant, there are people who are doing what is necessary to keep our democracy ticking, that is helping us to survive. The alarming spread of the Naxalites through their entire central belt of India suggests that there is a terminal illness in our democracy. It is up to young Indians who are willing to do something, who have that feeling of doing something for their nation, who will have to take responsibility for the nation if we are going to turn that tide around. Otherwise, one fine day, we will not be able to sit in such surroundings and deliberate on what to do with India, because there would be bombs and bullets flying all around. I was in Chhattisgarh last year, and since I was the guest of the government, I was given a weekend to travel in Chhattisgarh. And I expressed the desire to go to Bastar with my wife. Initially, they were non-committal, but I discerned that there was a reluctance in them to do that for me. So finally, I asked him, I said, ho sakega, nahi ho sakega? So I was told that, साहब बस्तर में तो कलेक्टर को उठा जाते हैं, आप तो बच जाओगे लेकिन हमको कोई गोली मार देगा. This was the situation. Government employees were not willing to risk going into a district of the sovereign nation of India. If we surrender our authority in this manner, how are we ever going to be able to claim that we are a nation and we are unified? And it is not because they are terroristically inclined in themselves, but because of the disparities that we have created in our nation, that this situation has occurred where people believe that they are not part of the privileged system of this nation. Yesterday, we didn't have electricity for 2 hours at home. And I felt like petitioning even the chief minister and going up to the prime minister. And then I remembered that 2 weeks back, I was in Latur, which is the hometown of the former chief minister of this state. And I was told that in the city of Latur, they get water supply only once in 14 days. 14 days. Once. And in the rural areas of Latur, once in 22 days, and that too after a trek of 5 or 6 kilometers to go to where the tanker stops. This is the kind of disparity that we have created in this nation of ours. And this has to be changed if this nation has to survive. In one way, I appreciate what the new Prime Minister has said in his first inaugural speech, that he wants to build toilets for every home in India. On another hand, I feel ashamed that even 60 years after independence, we are still talking about just toilets. Can't move on any further. This is the reality of what we are inheriting and what we have to carry forward. And this is what we need to do. I'd like to conclude, because I think I've overstepped my time limit, but a few like-minded people have come together to form a group called GAP, Global initiative against poverty, global action against poverty. It sounds very grand. What we intend to do is we are going to have a 2-day convention in Ahmedabad next year in March. As I said, we have many initiatives which are very effective in alleviating poverty in their own influence spheres. Unfortunately, those initiatives don't get showcased. It also becomes because the people who do those initiatives feel proprietary about it. And so they keep all those things to themselves instead of replicating it and networking it and taking it around and seeing that it is replicated in more places. Then there is a group of people who have ideas which are very, very implementable, which have a great chance of succeeding, but they don't find people to back them up. This 2-day convention intends to be a showcase of such ideas and a showcase of such initiatives which have succeeded, and bring industry captains to come and listen to the ideators, and then pick 1 or 2 ideas from that to support and carry forward and create a showcase of success. I don't know how much success we will get from it, but if people like you are attracted to it and come and listen to it, and maybe even out of those 10 or 20 projects that we showcase, if you pick up 5 and implement them, maybe it will make a difference. And so I would love for those of you who are interested in participating in this kind of thing to interact with my friend Lijo. Can you stand up, please? Lijo Chaco, who's the director of the program. Interact with him and find out how you can associate with us and participate with us, and maybe make that difference happen, make that change happen in our society by taking responsibility for it. We are great people at criticizing people who do not obey their responsibilities or who do not function according to their responsibilities. But as it was mentioned that we must be the change we wish to see in society, we never challenge the image in the mirror about how much responsibility that image has obeyed in the lifetime that they have spent. We have to audit ourselves on the grounds of morality and the grounds of compassionate work that we do. Bapu gave independent India its talisman when leaders of the interim government went to meet him and ask him how they were supposed to function. He gave them a message which now is remembered as his talisman, and briefly and not verbatimly, I'll tell you what it meant. He said, whenever you contemplate something, on doing something, visualize the face of the poorest of the poor and the weakest of weak person you have interacted with. And then ask yourself whether what you contemplate doing will make any difference in the life of that person. Will it empower that person to become self-reliant? Will it empower that person to make a change in his or her life? Will it make them self-sufficient for the rest of their lives? And he said, if the answer is yes, go ahead and do it. But if the answer is no, then you must realize that what you are doing is for your own self and doesn't matter to the person it should matter to. And unfortunately, our policymakers never made that into their yardstick of implementing policies and measures. It was always the grand sounding policies. The father of so-and-so policy was so-and-so kind of grandness, and never how much those policies would make a difference to the poorest of the poor and the weakest of the weak. Unless we start thinking of the poorest of the poor and the weakest of the weak and empowering them with self-respect, not with pity, with self-respect, we are not going to be really able to refer to this country as a nation. You must think about this. We have inspirations, not only Bapu, there are so many inspirations that we can think of. We're very fortunate at the wealth of inspiring icons that this country has produced. And many of those icons go around the world and still inspire people. I'll conclude, do I have 5 minutes? Okay, I'll conclude with how, since I was meant to talk about history, I'll conclude with how history still has a connect with the present. A few years back on the centenary of Satyagraha, there was a conference in Delhi where people who had successfully implemented the philosophy of Satyagraha and the method of Satyagraha the world over were invited to come and share their thoughts. And Lech Wałęsa of Solidarity from Poland, I think you must all have been toddlers when that was happening in Poland, but I was fortunate to witness that change, the revolution in Poland. And Lech Wałęsa was the author of that. And I was fortunate to interact with him at this session in Delhi. He's a very jovial guy, very unpretentious. And one evening we were sitting and talking, and he said, you know, Tushar, you don't know how much Gandhi had to do with the success of Solidarity in Poland. I knew that Lech Wałęsa, I used to consider him as his influence, but I did not know how deep that influence was, so I asked him to tell me how. And he said, when I started the union and we started agitating against the Soviet oppression, what we would do is we would stone the cars of the Soviet officials as they came in and out of the docks. And we would throw Molotov cocktails into their offices, and arson and things were our trademark, the hallmark of our movement. And he said the opposition in return retaliated with firing on us. And he said when my people started returning home wounded and many in body bags, the wives started feeling apprehensive because their breadwinners were dying or becoming incapacitated. And so they forced their husband to quit Solidarity and said, no, you have to support the family, don't bother about these duties and things. And so he said, I saw my support dwindling. And the leadership of Solidarity was worried because we didn't know how to continue with this anymore. And he said, in our desperation, we turned to Gandhi. And we said that, see, we've lost everything else, so let's try Gandhi's passive resistance and see if it works in Poland. And he said, we changed our methods. We started picketing the docks non-violently, and we would stop them accessing the dock, or we would prevent them from loading or disloading ships. But we would not throw stones, we would not throw Molotov cocktails. We would just sit and protest peacefully. He said 3 months later, the Soviets sent an emissary to me requesting us to please go back to the former ways, because if we threw stones and hurled Molotov cocktails, they could fire on us. But in this new form of protest, they didn't know how to react to us. And so they requested us, can you please start throwing stones back at us, because we're confused as to what to do with you. This was the power of Satyagraha. This was the power of Bapu's nonviolent movement, that he confounded his opponents. And this is the power of that weapon even today, in today's world, because many a times I'm confronted by the challenge of how I would apply the principle or method of nonviolence and passive resistance against a human bomb. Unfortunately, if you wait for somebody to go to the stage where death would be more attractive than life, it's too late for them to turn to nonviolence. Because nonviolence is not an instant headache relieving tablet. Nonviolence is a practice that has to be implemented so that the symptoms that cause the headaches don't happen. And so if you wait for a person to be ready to blow himself or herself up for the cause, it's just too late. It's no use talking about nonviolence then. I hope I have been able to convey what I was intended to convey this morning. I believe we might still have a little bit of time for Q&A, so thank you very much for this opportunity, and I hope you will carry some of the things that I talked about today from here. Thank you very much.